because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are, and we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
All right, welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a show where we discuss philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
And I'm Laura.
And today we're talking about a movie in which a guy spies on a woman, gets her confused with another woman who is killed. And no, actually, sorry, we're not talking about Alfred Hitchcock. It's actually Brian DePalma's Body Double. And we're happy to welcome back to the show our guest from a similarly psychosexual film, Basic Instinct, Matt Belenky. Matt is a part-time critic and a full-time lawyer. You can read him on The Gutter Review and Massive Cinema. And recently, he has been an associate producer on the new film Goodbye Petrushka, which is available now on Amazon Prime. Welcome back to the show, Matt.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to dive into yet another erotic thriller, psychosexual thriller, maybe the precursor to Basic Instinct in many ways.
But that's a good point. Yeah, we should talk about that. So, Matt, I want to start with a question which this has become our standard opening question. And in this case, I think it's an apt one because this is an older film. When did you first see Body Double? And how have your feelings about the film changed since then?
Yeah, so I think summer of 2016 in Pittsburgh, when I was living there, there was an indie theater that I seldom went to somehow to my detriment, because I realized that it was an awesome little place. And it's a one-screen theater, and it's a pretty big theater. And they were doing a De Palma retrospective. And I remember going to see the documentary De Palma, which I think it was sort of centered around seeing the Untouchables and Dressed to Kill all in a theater. And kind of feeling pretty high of seeing those movies in theaters and being on a little bit of a De Palma bender. I wanted to get into the deep cuts, and Body Double kind of fulfills that spot. And I heard about this movie. I knew Melanie Griffith was in it. I think I saw clips and stills of it before. And then I watched it, I think, just by myself at my house after renting it from the library. And I was captured by it. And the thing with Brian De Palma's movies, it's hard to sort of name your favorite one, because he's one of those directors where the body of work kind of stands out more than individual films because of his sort of signature filmmaking styles. And this movie is no exception, because it is really bizarre. It is really strange. It's super kinky. And yet you're sort of captivated by this film because it does have all of those things that De Palma does well. And it's one of those genres that he goes back to time and time again throughout his career when he's maybe in a rut creatively. This genre plays well into his love affair with Alfred Hitchcock. And after watching this film, I was kind of like, wow, this was bizarre, but it was very 80s. And I loved the music video within the movie, within a porn movie element. And I kind of wanted to go back to this film because I've either heard or read enough about his other films. And we're at the point where everyone's finding their De Palma film to defend nowadays that at the time of their release maybe weren't so well received or weren't so well liked. Snake Eyes being another example. But I kind of wanted to defend this one, even from his number one defender, Pauline Kael.
Yeah. It was interesting that when we were talking, it was between this and Snake Eyes, and I, in a way, I'm glad you chose this. I had seen Snake Eyes before, and I had not actually seen Body Double before. So, but Laura had, and what was your relationship to it?
I watched this movie in high school. And it's all kind of a jumble to me. I think in high school, I decided I was like into movies and I watched a bunch of stuff all together with no sense of chronology, with no sense of like what came first or what was influenced by what. It all kind of just like got jumbled in there for me. And so like I knew this movie was I mean, I wasn't so unaware that I didn't understand this movie was like quoting Hitchcock and in love with Hitchcock. But this was around the same time that I was also watching a lot of Hitchcock movies and I was discovering Hitchcock. And I was just like, yeah, this is how movies should be.
I see.
They should
male
all,
gazy.
Yeah, they should all be male gazy and they should all have intrigue and rear projection. What's the fucking problem? I was just like, it's awesome.
That makes sense that you would feel very comfortable with this movie.
Comfortable with this movie. Yeah. And I think
your film language was entirely informed to allow you to watch this film and be like, this is a perfectly normal movie.
This is what movies look like.
And this is
normal.
how movie plots unfold, where there's like a huge break in the middle of the film where everything totally changes.
It all feels fine to me. I was like, this is totally normal and natural and I love it. But there was a zaniness that I loved, a sort of unbridledness to DePalma movies that I enjoyed. I watched last night, Justin and I watched Phantom of the Paradise. I saw that in high school as well. A theater kid turned me on to Phantom of the Paradise. And so I think I just sort of watched this one and Dressed to Kill and Phantom all in kind of a quick succession around the same time. And I think Dressed to Kill was the sort of the favorite for me at the time, more than Body Double. Now we've rewatched Body Double and we've rewatched Dressed to Kill in the recent future. And I like both of them. I think there's stuff in Dressed to Kill that's a little bit harder to get over, and this one is sillier in a way that's really fun.
Yeah.
So I think it jumped for me and as a favorite.
Agreed on all fronts. So, all right, Matt, back to you. This is, as you put it, a very strange film, and it's strange in a lot of dimensions. It's strange in its construction, in terms of its narrative, but it's also just strange in terms of what happens in the film. There's a lot of very weird scenes which seem to take place in almost a completely different movie, and there's a lot of things which feel like they can't be happening within the film universe, at least to me. So my question to you, Matt, is, what's your take on like what actually happens in the film? Like, do you just read it totally literally? Do you think some parts are meant to, be fantasy? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I totally forgot the fantasy elements of it that come into play in the back half, especially the last few scenes. And when they happened, I was like, oh, this makes sense. If you've seen Carrie, seen the ending of Carrie, or you've seen the ending of Femme Fatale, which is another terrific kind of late stage De Palma movie that's garnered a following. You kind of get that these kind of dreamy sequences that may not be reality are kind of his go-to and kind of his thing. Not really in a David Lynch way. I feel like De Palma is a little bit more formalist and overt, where David Lynch is just so ambiguous and obscure that you have no idea what's going on the whole time. Here, as you mentioned, the halfway point, the movie kind of changes. And in a big way, I think this film is both a love letter to Hollywood and kind of an FU to De Palma's critics. We mentioned Dressed to Kill and Scarface. These were films that were really met with a lot of ridicule from various, whether feminist organizations or the transsexual community of Dressed to Kill. Yeah. And with Scarface, the ratings board was really going at him for the chainsaw scene and the sort of violence involved in that. And here he takes it almost up a notch, right? In a Tarantino way where, Quentin was critiqued about using feet a lot in his films. Then he just started using it even more, or doing it even more close-ups of feet or more bloodiness. And with Body Double, it's the drill that the main villain, the killer, who's supposed to be robbing a vault or a safe in this lady's apartment, he uses it to kill the woman. And that scene, according to the De Palma doc, was met with a lot of criticism. And the head of PR for Columbia called DePalma after they screened that movie, and they were like, "You got to change this. This is insane. Like, people are going to walk out of theaters. People are going to be up my ass about everything you've done already." But there is something refreshing, and I do agree that this movie is really funny, and I forgot about that, and it is really humorous, and he's always had that throughout his films. This one maybe more so with the dialogue, and with the subtext being that our leading man is kind of a nobody, and I think that's kind of the biggest win. And a lot of the criticism at the time was that Craig Wasson's sort of inaction or his lack of talent. But he's almost perfect for the role because he is that guy. There's not many people that can sort of embody this lo-fi actor turned, peeping Tom turned porno star, turned hero.
Yes.
And
turned successful actor again. Yeah, I mean, it's I'll just do a quick summary of like the events of the film.
Okay. If you feel the need.
Quickly, just so that we can then pick which parts we want to target. I mean, Jake Scully. I keep thinking of. I kept thinking he was the guy from Avatar. I was like, his name is so similar.
You're like, when does he get?
Jake
with
Scully.
The blue people?
Yeah, I was wondering. He was looking a little pale.
Okay.
Jake Scully. He is a kind of a mediocre actor. He's basically fired from, or almost immediately at the first scene, fired from his job because he's claustrophobic. He goes home. His girlfriend's cheating on him. He goes to a bar. He basically leaves the apartment because, it turns out it wasn't even his apartment. It was his girlfriend's apartment. So like this guy is in so many ways being just like emasculated by the film again and again. He meets some guy who's also an actor, and the guy's like, "Hey, I'm house sitting. Can you take over so that I can go do a play?" And while he's there in this crazy sort of nouveau house in the Hollywood Hills,
like the Space Needle, like a spaceship in the sky with one room. It's just
and there's like an elevator that takes you up, rotating bed. But the key thing is it's also got like a little telescope which he uses to spy on a woman who's dancing. He spies on her. He becomes a bit of obsessed with her. He follows her around the next day, and he realizes that she's also being followed by a Native American guy, and who eventually robs her and takes something out of her purse. Then he is watching her the next day, and he sees like the Native American guy's in her house, and he's trying to kill her. So he goes and tries to save her, but then the guy kills her with a drill. And then that's the halfway part of the movie, basically. And then the movie sort of, that narrative thread just ends. It's basically just ends. It's just like, okay, I guess she's gone. That's that. He's sitting on the bed, the rotating bed, drinking, and he's watching porn, and he sees a woman dancing, I guess, it's exactly the same dance. But like, I would not have been like, oh, exactly the same dance. But DePalma gives that cue, which really helps, which is the music. The music fades in to let you know, okay, there's a realization.
Not the tattoo. The tattoo also didn't do it for you. She has a tattoo in the same place.
Anyway, yeah, okay. So all those details, yeah. He thinks maybe.
Do you think all women just like look the same and dance the same, or what?
I mean, it's a pretty generic dance, but anyway, she's just sort of dancing naked. So he's like, okay, that's the same dance. So something triggers, and he's like, I've got to go meet this woman. So what would you do if you wanted to go meet like this porn actress? The first thing he does is make sense. He goes to the studio and tries to talk to her. But instead they're casting. So he decides to audition. Well, because he's an actor, so whatever. So he auditions for a porn. He gets the gig, and he does a scene with her, and they have sex on camera in the porn movie. Then he pretends he's a porn producer.
At this point, he's wearing leather pants and slick back hair.
Yeah, suddenly
this is my favorite.
The
turn.
Confidence has like come all the way back. He's
and
the mojo is back.
I feel like he's doing more of a Jimmy Stewart impression in this period of time because I feel like he ups the Jimmy Stewart accent.
That's interesting. I didn't catch that.
Okay.
He goes back. He sort of like takes her out to dinner under the pretense that he's a porn producer and he wants to make a movie with her. she sort of thinks, oh, that's kind of cool. They go back to his weird rotating room, the rotating bed thing. And he's like, wait, actually, I need to ask you some questions. He sort of confirms that she was hired by his friend. And now it starts to come out that he's thinking, okay, I'm the patsy. I'm supposed to have witnessed a murder, but it was all set up by the husband who had a lot of money, or sorry, because this lady who he was spying on had a lot of money, and the husband wanted to take all that money from her, and he was supposed to see someone else do the murder so that the husband gets off, okay, or something like that. Anyway, so it's all supposed to be this thing which is a misdirect, but he's realized it somehow, and then what happens next? It's very convoluted towards the end, but basically he thinks Holly, the woman, the porn star, is in danger.
She gets in the car. She gets in the car with the Native American.
She gets in the car with the Native American guy who
tries to bury her.
Who had killed the woman. He does try to kill her and bury her alive, but he's saved, she's saved by Jake. And in the end, there's this kind of very mysterious transition. He's back in his job, in the original job in this movie as an actor in the movie called Vampire's Kiss. And Holly, the porn star lady, is there on the set with him. So presumably now they're like together, or at least anyway, yep. She's there and he's doing a scene and like all is good in the world.
Yeah, not only that, he's doing a scene and they're like, man, we love you so much. And we're so glad we fired that terrible actor that replaced you. He was a piece of shit. You're great. Way to go for dating a porn star. You're doing great.
Okay.
The end.
Given that Wikipedia summary, like what the hell is happening in this movie? I mean, that's like the like actual events of the plot. But like, I am curious, so there's obviously a lot of Hitchcock. One thing that often happens in a Hitchcock film is you have a guy who is like a patsy type, but like in the end kind of like works it all out. And there is this thing to Hitchcock, which is, I think, kind of a wish fulfillment, where it's like, it's a gratification to male viewers who might identify with this guy who has been emasculated, right? Like, he lost his job and so on. Like that's something, a guy might be able to, a guy in particular, right? Because working and all that, right? A guy, breadwinner, right, might be able to see himself in, but also see himself as like, oh man, it sucks to be like that. But then, but you get the win of this guy solves the case and he's like the winner in the end. So there's this kind of like wish fulfillment thing. It just feels so fantastical at the end that like large parts of this movie are just not real. In particular, the parts of the movie in which Jake is shown to be competent and sexually charged and like scoring with women. You know what I mean? Like all of those sequences are very strange. So anyway, I don't know. I'm curious what you think, Matt. I mean, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it feels like the first half of the movie on rewatch is De Palma flexing and kind of creating that cinematic universe that he's so good at, that makes him so unique. And what I mean by that is that whole Beverly Hills Mall stalking scene or walking scene, which is phenomenal. And more than I think any other director in the last 50 years, De Palma is so good at sort of setting up a scene and making you aware of the geography and the setting of it. And he does that so well in that mall scene where it's literally a guy just stalking. And it's Craig Wasson following around Gloria Revelle. The reason you kind of come to a De Palma movie is to see those moments where you as a viewer feel complicit in the luridness and in the kind of despicable, because you're watching this guy follow this woman around and also sort of peep at her in the dressing room. But that mall is so cool, and there's so many movements happening, and it looks so fluid. Like you got the escalators, the mirrors, the mirrors on the other side, and then the villain appearing. But at that halfway point, it becomes like the Melanie Griffith show, right? It becomes the movie that when people saw it at the time, that was the person they took away. That was the person who kind of stood out, was her performance. And her career kind of skyrocketed as a result after it. And DePalma talks about it in his documentary, DePalma, that Jake Paltrow and Noah Baumbach directed, how Hitchcock's whole thing was sometimes the lead up to a moment is more interesting than the actual moment itself.
Yeah.
Right? All the pieces around it. Think of like the final climax of Carrie with all the various shots of the monkey blood above her head before it even happens. There's so many different angles. And here he's being so patient, right? It's almost an hour until the Ravel is killed by this guy. And we see a red herring with her husband come in and slap her and then leave. We see another moment where the guy where the villain snatches her purse on the beach and then runs away. So there are all these like moments building up to it. And then after it happens, you're almost like exalted as a viewer, and it's a sigh of relief.
Just on the tonal shift. So it really feels a little bit like the first half is more of the classic Hitchcock thing, more like Dressed to Kill. But then the second half is more slapstick. We watched, as Laura mentioned, we watched Phantom of the Paradise, and another De Palma movie that I'd watched a long time ago is Hi Mom, which has a lot of slapstick comedic elements to it, and it really feels more like those movies in the second half, and less like this staid Hitchcockian thriller. I also want to mention one other thing about the making the audience complicit that you mentioned, which I think Hitchcock does. Obviously, Hitchcock is the absolute master of this, but De Palma has learned at the knee of the master and is also very good at this. And the scene that I really enjoy in that regard is the first scene when he's looking through the telescope at Gloria.
Yeah.
And the camera just lingers on his face.
I'd like you to meet my favorite neighbor.
Okay.
See her?
Whoa. Whoa.
Gets better.
What's she doing?
Just keep watching. You'll see. You want to get a little closer?
You bet. Oh,
Focus.
she's a little out of focus. Yes.
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 Yes. Hang on.
Yes.
Does she do this a lot? Like clockwork, every night.
It goes on for, first of all, it just goes on for way too long.
So long.
It cuts back, forth, back, forth. And every time it cuts to her, she's like dancing, and it's okay, you're like, great, all right, she's dancing. That's fine. Like, that's all we need. We know she's dancing. But then we cut back to him, and he's looking around uncomfortably because his friend has like vacated the frame. We don't know what his friend is doing. And it's almost like he's looking at the audience to be like, are you guys, am I allowed to do this? Is this okay? Are you doing this too? Okay, you're doing it too. Let's go back in. And then he goes back in, and then we get another shot of her dancing. And then we go back to him, and he's looking around. Is this
like,
okay?
Really?
And then we go back to her. Like, we just keep going back and forth. And every time it really feels like he's, maybe as Quad De Palma, being like, yeah, you could just leave if you want. But if you stay, you're enjoying this as much as this guy is. So that's the complicitness, I think. And I think, it helps that obviously she's doing a very sexy dance, and the intended audience is heterosexual men. So they're having a good time. And like he is as our viewpoint character. But we're uncomfortable. It's like uncomfortable to be showing someone in this voyeuristic way. I mean, granted, we're not doing that, but like the character is doing that.
Yeah.
And it's, he is called out for it. He then has to live with that later when the police are like, yeah, you're a peeping Tom. And
yeah, I mean, De Palma, even like, in case you didn't get that feeling the first time around, we get another moment.
That's true.
When he's looking at her again, and now the Native American who's like fixing the satellite is looking at her too, and he can see that the native, and then he's like, he makes a face like, oh, that's gross, and then he makes a face like, oh, I'm doing it too. okay. Like there's like a whole series of little expressions he makes on his face. Like it's not, like De Palma's like, I just feel like I need to make this point one more time for you. But I think it's like when I first rewatched this movie, I was like, I don't know if Craig Watson is good. And by this point, I'm like, no, he's really good. Like he knows what movie's in, and he's actually excellent.
Even if those aren't like every decision is a conscious, intentional decision, he's embodying the character
Totally.
like, fully. And maybe some of this is just his own uncomfortableness shining through. Who cares? It's very good and very effective.
Agreed.
Yeah, totally. We need an actor who we believe is at the absolute bottom of his career right now, or is in a real tailspin, which he is. And then you slowly start to kind of grow with him, because this is someone who has to go from 0 to 180, or 0 to 90 rather, to use a car analogy, in the course of a film, right? He has to go from someone who's terrible, who's lacks talent in a city that's pretty superficial, and I think I don't think he realizes he's becoming the hero in his own story, but he's so caught up in everything, caught up in the lust and in being in love, that he starts to believe that maybe he is the hero of his own story, and then he starts to go into a bit of a rabbit hole with his journey, and it's fun.
Yeah, and maybe De Palma maybe he takes some pity on this character, right? He sees some of himself in the character, so he decides, all right, I'm going to make this guy the hero. It's my story, so I'm going to make him the hero.
Right, yeah, we never quite figured out what we think that happens at the end of this movie.
But it's not even just what happens. So at the end, but like there's this, so almost immediately after he fails to catch the Native American guy who's stolen Gloria's purse, he kind of runs down this hallway and he has a panic attack because of the claustrophobia, which is I found it a really nicely done sequence in terms of just kind of not overdoing it, but nonetheless generating a kind of oddness that comes with terror. Like it's terrifying because the Native American guy very clearly is someone wearing a mask. Its face is very strange looking. And then we have the canted angle, and you have the strong backlighting, and everything just looks odd. Something is off. Also, you have no idea what the fuck is happening in this movie at this point. And so I think it does generate a kind of terror, and that's what he is experiencing in that moment. Gloria catches up with him, has to literally help him out of the tunnel. So he's in a real low point, right? He failed to sort of, I don't know, rescue her from the villain. And yet she has to help him. And yet De Palma gives him this unbelievably high romance, spinning, 360 camera, rear projection, gauzy lighting, makeout scene.
I saw you back there and at the hotel. You've been following me, haven't you?
Yeah.
Why? Did my husband hire you?
No, I'm...
What?
That's where you're like, wait this cannot be real. Or you just think, well, this is De Palma's story, and in this story, this dude is the hero. And the hero gets to kiss the girl randomly because she's just met him 5 seconds ago.
Right, totally. And De Palma in this case is kind of that character played by Greg Henry, the guy who turns out to be the villain. But, one of the critiques of this film, the Pauline Kael kind of went at him. Even she came out against him in this film and was kind of like, we've seen it all before. It's kind of like a greatest hits album that you don't really want to watch. It's not as good as the other stuff. We've kind of seen these moves. And in a way, I think she's right. I think this film is kind of a victory lap of all the things that De Palma does that we've seen before. The split diopter, where he zooms in on someone up front, and then they're also somehow zoomed in the back. You see it now, I think, used in film and in TV, but it's often used like when it doesn't matter. Like people do it now and they're like, you don't even notice it because the scene doesn't call for it. But I think he did it with a purpose. When he did it, there was always some kind of motive, cinematically and storytelling wise, that helped him. But even despite the fact that it's a victory lap, it's kind of a fun one, and it's kind of an entertaining one, and it still calls to kind of the thing. He's also never done an LA movie, not to this degree. He's obviously worked in the Hollywood system, and a lot of big name directors do have their kind of LA movie where Los Angeles plays a character. And Hitchcock never really had something like that. I think maybe that's a differentiator between the two here. But this does feel like very much an LA movie where everyone has some skin in the game, whether that skin is in the porno world or the low budget horror world, or other. Even the cop asks him, have you been anything that I would know of? What movies have you been in? He's like, it's the first question he asks him outside on the pool after a murder's just gone down. But I think the humor of it was perhaps lost on people, that it is meant to be a satire of sorts. It is made to poke fun at the industry.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about your take on it as a victory lap is interesting. It does feel like a movie done by someone who is very comfortable with these themes and in this genre, both on the humor side, but also on the thriller side. And part of the reason I say this is that I think it takes a lot of guts and belief in yourself and confidence to have a film in which there's no obvious narrative propulsion to pretty much any part of the film, except for that moment when he's trying to save her. Beyond that, and maybe so basically there's two moments of real narrative propulsion. The one is when he sees that Gloria is being strangled by the Native American guy, and then the second is when he's trying to rescue Holly. Those are clear kind of this needs to happen. He either gets there or he
got to
doesn't.
save the girl.
Yeah. But other than that, there's just incredibly large stretches of the film where it's not at all clear, where it's going. So we're just like following this guy around. He got fired. I guess then in the early parts, you're like, is he going to get a new place to stay or not? Like, okay. He gets a place. And then what's happening? Well, what's going to happen with this girl? I guess is but it's like, there's no clear propulsiveness to it. And yet I think it's just incredibly watchable. Like, I'm intrigued by everything that's happening. Partly because, to your point, Matt, it's just the craft is top notch. I mean, every sequence is shot in a really creative way. By the very fact that he's lingering on some of these sequences, which he absolutely there's no plot reason to linger on, like the voyeur scene or even the extended chase through the mall. I mean, there's really, in the end, she buys a new set of underwear and then throws them away. I think that like literally sums up that scene. Like, in a way, it amounts to nothing. It progresses the plot not at all. You already know this guy's a peeping Tom.
Except for those undies in the pocket are going to come back later.
Yes, that's true. But not really, because what does that amount to? The cop finds them and they're like, okay, you're
further evidence that you're gross.
But we already had evidence. But what I like is that despite that's the kind of thing that if you went to a script doctor, they'd be like, cut that sequence. It makes it gets you nowhere.
Yeah.
And yet it's so watchable. It's so compellingly shot that it's maybe even the standout sequence of the film.
Yeah.
And it's like the part that will keep you coming back to be like, oh, check out this sequence. It's really cool. All these different angles he's using, how he's setting up the spatial geography with cuts and everything, how he's creating tension, but in the service of nothing.
Right.
And I think
it's the same with Dress to Kill and the scene in the Met. There's a wonderful scene in the Met. And that, you know, the point of that, I guess, is that she eventually gets killed. But like her tryst with this man in the Met, like in the glove that gets dropped and all this, like doesn't really have anything to do with how the movie's going to go for the rest of the next 2 hours. But it's really wonderful to watch. And when I think about it, that movie, that's the, like that scene pops out to me every time.
I think that's the real magic of, you know, filmmaking in general, is that it kind of overwhelms us with the beauty and grandeur and, you know, all the visual appeal, the visual aesthetic. And it allows is we get caught up in that. And that allows us to forget and get, you know, kind of lost in it in a way which we could overlook. And even these other things like plot and story and even character development just are less important sometimes. You just get caught up in the pure aesthetic of it. And I think there's something, if you can do that I think is a very high level of cinema, of filmmaking. Because it's in a way transcending the kinds of things that you would do in maybe a novel or in a play or you know, in other kinds of media, or, you know, even in photography, when, you know, the subject of the photograph is such an important thing. Here the subject is like less, it's like takes a back seat to just the like overwhelming aesthetic of everything. And I think that is a real strength of the film, and I think of De Palma's filmmaking in general, but I think in this film in particular, just the fact that he stretches out that what would I think in another film be a 10-minute thing, he stretches to an hour. All this stuff with him, Jake following around Gloria, getting caught up and it goes nowhere. They don't actually, you know, maybe they were going to get together or something, but like that's such a pie in the sky dream, and they don't actually get together, and then she just dies, and we know basically nothing about her. We also know very little about Jake, and yet we're still compelled. I think that's potent. And it's also compelling even after the film ends, because the film ends, maybe you guys can correct me, but this guy, okay, so what it turns out is it was Sam the whole time, his friend, who's wearing the Native American, he's like got a mask on and stuff. But like, come on, what is his plan really? Like, if you really sit down and break it down, the plan makes pretty much no fucking sense.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work for very little.
I was thinking about that. I was like, then he's got to climb up on a satellite. He's got a satellite.
What's he doing in the satellite? That makes no sense.
He's got to get on the satellite, I guess, so he could be seen by his friend to be watching. That seems unnecessary. Or maybe he's just watching the show too, but he's got to wear his cool disguise. But also at one point he's driving around in his like satellite fixer car.
Yeah.
So he's got
to have rented a special car.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. And then why is he following her around? Now, ostensibly that's to rob her of the key card. But like
he lives there. And also he has another key card that he already gave to Millie Griffith. So.
No, he already had the key card. For sure he already had the key card. But yeah.
Oh, I see. To make it look like that's how they got it.
But come on, it's like it's so convoluted, you know?
Of course it is.
And yet I would not ever be like.
But how satisfying is it when finally Jake figures it out and he's like, here's what happened, and then we get the flashbacks. Oh, that's the best. That's what I want from every movie.
I also love it when he's like, here's what happened, says a bunch of convoluted stuff to people who are looking at him skeptically, like that makes no sense. And you're like, no, I'm in a Brian DePalma film. It makes perfect sense.
Sam Bouchard is Alexander Revell. You see, he hired the Indian to follow Gloria and snatch her purse and steal the card key to her house and then sneak inside. And then when she got home, the Indian opened the blinds so that I could see him kill her. Alexander Revell set me up in this house to witness the murder. And he hired a porno actress to be the bait.
He's like, did I mention I stopped drinking 3 days ago, but then I've started drinking a lot. Everything is going great. I figured it all out.
Let me give you another example of something incredibly convoluted that I realized. Okay, so when Sam, dressed up as a Native American guy, is going to kill Gloria, okay, he's in her house, and he calls Jake at the space house, and they talk on the phone, and he's like, and Jake's like trying to get him off the phone because he's watching her, talking to a police officer. So she's downstairs in her house talking to a police officer, Gloria.
Mhm.
He's watching her through the telescope. He's like, Sam, I got to get off the phone. You're no messages. Hang up. Then he pans up and he sees Native American guy who we know is fucking Sam.
Oh.
So he made the phone call from inside of her house while she was downstairs.
I think he was just like, you watching this? And that was him checking in.
Yeah, but like, there's so many risks. I'm sitting here like, this actually makes no fucking sense.
Or does it make a lot of sense?
No, I mean, it's cool as shit.
Well, I think, you're too much sense. Right. Like all the sense. You know that I'm really quick to jump into conspiracy theories, Jess. So, but I'm like, this is totally fine. But is your thinking in the end that like it's Brian, what you proposed before, it's Brian DePalma's story. This guy's our hero. So the hero wins in the end, just like the hero wins in the end in Hitchcock movies. Yeah. I mean, do you think it's like a giant critique? I mean, he loves Hitchcock, but is he also sort of undercutting him, making fun of him, not just pointing out that we are the voyeurs, but like actually like Hitchcock heroes are gross and they shouldn't win in the end. They shouldn't get the girl. I mean, I think about this with Rear Window, a movie I loved so much in high school. And now when I watch it, it kind of bums me out a little bit. Not particularly because he like is the hero who figures out who kills his neighbor across the way, but like everything that happens with Grace Kelly, he's so horrible to her that whole movie. He's so awful to her. Everybody tells him he doesn't deserve her. And like, she just sticks around, takes all of his crap, and then just decides to like adapt to his life. It sucks. It sucks so much. And maybe Brian De Palma sort of knows that like, this was, maybe you're shaking your head like you don't.
No, I
want
to know what Matt thinks. Is it a critique, Matt, or is this something else?
I mean, I was surprised to see, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but De Palma is known for more pessimistic endings in his films. And I think that's one of the aspects or tropes that makes him stand out among many from that OG Brat Pack crew of his from the 70s. And I'm talking about him, Spielberg, Scorsese, Coppola, and Paul Schrader, and George Lucas. They were kind of that squad. And there's that photo that circulates film Twitter at least once a year of the boys around the table from that era. And De Palma does look like that kind of angry cousin or angry brother that, maybe saw some dark stuff early on. He couldn't get out of his head. Whereas the other ones were a bit more populist than him in his style. And in this film, I was surprised that Craig Wasson kind of won at the end and that he got his revenge, or he got his second chance at getting the vampire role right. Because so many of his films are either ambiguous or the bad guy gets away, or something really bad happens and something crazy happens. In some ways, it is both hopeful, but it is also a kind of dark. I mean, we're seeing someone go through the motions of being kicked out of a low budget movie to sort of being cast by this nobody villain, and Wasson's performance does carry the film in a big capacity. And I think after the film came out, obviously Melanie Griffith was talked about a lot, but there is a lot of self-reflexive kind of movements happening from De Palma. And Chris Dumas, who wrote a great book on Brian's history called On American Psycho. I highly recommend it as a read. He kind of talked about how this was the most self-reflexive movie of the Reagan era, Body Double, and that it's no coincidence that Bret Easton Ellis's Patrick Bateman cited this as his favorite movie, An American Psycho. I think Patrick Bateman says he's seen this like 37 times, and it's something as simple and as crazy as the drill in the film that you come away from this film and that was a big subject of conversation then, and it kind of still is after you watch it, the insanity of it. And when you ask De Palma about it, he's kind of like, well, how else are you going to let the main character see that she's getting drilled? It's got to come through the floor. That's the only way to do it. So there is kind of a logistical quality, I think, to his filmmaking that people think is a little bit crazier, or he's purposely trying to titillate people, and maybe he is. Definitely he is, I think, in this film. But he's also servicing the story.
I mean, now that I'm thinking a little bit about where this character ends up, right? He kind of ends up exactly where he started, in a sense, right? He has a blonde girlfriend. He's the star of some shitty vampire movie.
Right.
He doesn't really like go from 0 to hero, right? He just kind of goes from 5 to 5, right? He goes down negative
5
for a
to
second,
negative
but
5,
then
back up
comes
to 5.
back up.
Just a strong fine.
And there might be, given when you think about it that way, and you also think about that final sequence where he's being buried by the villain, and how there's like a flashback to his experience in the in the vampire movie, being kind of in the coffin. There might be some evidence here that it's like the reverse. So the film is actually the reverse of what's happening that's depicted in the film.
Okay.
So what's depicted in the film is he summons his experience as an actor to overcome his claustrophobia and like defeat this villain, like get out of the grave. But maybe it's the reverse. So maybe what he's doing is like, as an actor experiencing claustrophobia, so he sort of enters this fugue state where he imagines basically everything that happens in the film, and that sort of charges him up to like get through the scene.
Okay.
And then what we're seeing are basically the bookends of the film are just like what really happens in the film. He's doing the first scene, and instead of actually failing,
he does the next scene in the shower.
Yeah,
and
he just goes to the next scene. He just gets through it, and everything in the film is just his like way of processing his claustrophobia.
Does that feel less outlandish to you than my suggestion that it's a critique?
Well, so now I was trying to connect that to the critique thing.
Okay.
So I don't know if you read it that way, is that a critique? Well, what would he be saying in that? I don't know. I mean, maybe it would be like some kind of commentary on actors and like what actors have to sort of go through to like power through a scene or something. I don't quite know what to take away from the film on that reading.
My thinking for why it could be a critique, and I know like I'm equally, it's like maybe it's wish fulfillment on my own to imagine that's what's going on, because I think Brian DePalma's commentary on his own films is not necessarily like feminist or post-postmodern or anything about that. But like so he has this scene where Jake is in the grave and he's flashing back to being a vampire and how scary that was for him when he was in that coffin. He's feeling the claustrophobia, and then he powers through it. He gets out of there.
Yeah, he wants to do it again.
He defeats Sam, right? He and the Sam and the dog go like into the water or whatever. And what happens? Melanie Griffith comes to, and she's like yelling at him.
Yeah.
She's not like, my hero.
Yeah, she doesn't
You're
believe
wonderful.
him.
She's like, you're a fucking necromaniac. Get away from me. Don't touch me. She's just screaming at him. She refuses to get out of the grave. And he's like, no, I'm really trying to help you. I'm actually the hero of this story. And she's like, hell no. And then the next scene is him back at his job, doing great. And then she's off stage being like, you're so wonderful. Thumbs up. It's such a jarring switch that it makes me think that this ending is, if not a critique, then tongue in cheek, a fugue state, like his bender, like gone, like where he ends up in his fantasy. I don't know, but it doesn't feel like it can be.
So
real.
you think, so it's like maybe one read of the film, a different read than the one I proposed is, throughout the film, he sort of enters these fantasy states.
Yeah.
So the clearest examples are the kiss with Gloria, the porn shoot scene.
Yes.
And then the end of the film.
Yeah.
Each of those you might think are his kind of wish fulfillment fantasies where he achieves the thing that he is most desiring. And it's interesting that each of those sequences, you could cut them and the plot of the film is the same.
Yeah.
Right? He doesn't need to have kissed Gloria. He doesn't need to actually have sex on a porno shoot with Holly to pretend he's a porn producer. That doesn't need to have happened. And he doesn't need to have gotten his job back inexplicably. So that's another read, is that like this guy is sort of prone to these flights of fantasy that DePalma is like happy to visually indulge.
Yeah.
But again, to what end? Is the thought that is a critique? So this guy is like just a fucking schlub in the end, and
This guy just shouldn't get a happy ending. The happy ending is absurd.
Yeah, and some of our greatest heroes maybe are the most perverted people, and that's this guy in this case.
Yeah.
As someone who is basically stalking Gloria Revelle the whole movie, while the villain is also stalking her. So there's almost like a simultaneous accomplice liability thing going on. But I found it fascinating that Melanie Griffith is Tippi Hedren's daughter.
Of course. I had also read that
Right.
Jamie Lee Curtis was in the running for this, which is just like, I mean, I don't know if that's true, but I was just like, oh my gosh. Like he was just like, bring back the Hitchcock daughters.
So that was a nice little tip of the cap. And it was funny. We talked about earlier, Justin, you brought it up with the scene where it all comes together for Jake Scully, where he sees her dancing in a similar manner to the girl across the street. And I was like, what is he looking at? What exactly did he find? I had no idea what the heck was going on.
Laura was like, oh, it was the exact same fucking dance.
I memorized
I'm just
it.
like,
I learned it in high school.
It's a like strip.
Is that-
It's a generic stripper dance. Come on.
She talks about it like it is like her signature.
I know.
It is. She's like my self-help dance.
She's like, first I like rub my nipples,
far and
then I show
wide.
off my Holly tattoo. Sorry, Matt.
Excuse you, Justin. It's a work of art.
That is something. And in that moment, I had no idea what was going on until he had to like explain it to her later on. And we mentioned the scene where the Native American guy is like fixing the satellite. He suddenly, works for the cable company, and I'm like, what is that going to do to help him get into the house? I feel like he's drawing attention by creating these like sparks in the middle of LA night.
Yeah. I know, but it's the 80s, and you got to have some like flash dance style, like, so, I don't know, is that called soldering? Just whatever that, the sparks are flying when you're putting metal to metal. It's an 80s thing.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. He was like doing his best welder impression. 50 feet in the air, Brad Pitt style in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But the other kind of scene, we mentioned the chase scene, and Justin, you mentioned like the patience he has with so many of these scenes that kind of drag out. On paper, they'd be written off or they'd be scribbled and redlined. But there is an endearing, like methodical nature to a lot of his big scenes, and he is someone who's known for his set pieces throughout his career. So in many ways, he's almost not predictable, but you're going to get a couple moments that he's working towards, and whether it's even a Mission Impossible, right, with Tom Cruise hanging by the rope, that whole sequence where he's hanging out in the CIA office trying to get the floppy disk. There is like a simplicity and a predictability to his filmmaking, but you don't know what he's going to do, or you don't know how he's going to pull off the stunt, or what it's going to be.
Every choice is deliberate, even when it doesn't lead anywhere, and it doesn't matter. And it also doesn't matter to my enjoyment of the film. And that's like a magical thing. So, Matt, I think we have defended the movie. I mean, I think not that the movie needs a defense in today's day and age, but I think we've given it a good case. But I do want to ask one last thing about the title and about the ending. So this, I feel like, is incredibly important.
I have information about this.
Okay,
but okay.
So here's how I want to frame it. But tell me what you think. So, the movie is titled Body Double. There's obviously a doubling that occurs with Holly and Gloria, where he mistakes Holly for Gloria and then figures that out. That's obviously a Vertigo thing. Okay. But then in the end of the film, I mean, the film is called Body Double. And what a body double is somebody who stands in for someone else in a film, often in the case for like nudity, but it just could be anytime you back shot of someone and they're not available, the actor's not available, you just get a body double to do it. And he gives us that at the very end of the film where the credits are occurring, where we're told that now we're going to sub out a different person for the bottom shot. And the mid shot is then this other person. And then we cut, and then he cuts back and forth between the two, kind of showing us the seamlessness with which that, right, that kind of, where you kind of just forget that it's two different people.
Yeah.
Okay, so like, what's the point of all this?
Okay.
I don't really understand.
So here's the intel that I have, and Matt probably knows more about this too, because it sounds like he's better researched than me. But what I had read was that the movie starts for him, the idea of the movie starts with the idea of the body double, because he is shooting Dressed to Kill. And if you remember, Angie Dickinson, it starts with the woman in the shower, which Angie Dickinson's in the shower. And she's sort of like kind of doing what Melanie Griffith is doing. She's kind of like just enjoying herself in the shower. And there are cuts. There's her face, and then there's boob. And then there's her face, and then there's boob, because Angie Dickinson used a body double in that movie. And Brian DePalma like just had conversations with her body double. He was just like, what's it like to be a body double? Like, what's up with that? And then he interviewed her because he was just like interested. And then the idea came from, he was like, what would I do? So this is all about like, you know, misdirecting your eye, right? Making you think you're looking at one thing when you're looking at something else. And he was like, what would I do if I wanted somebody to look in a different direction? Well, if I wanted somebody. So this movie is just like essentially him being like, look over here, no, look over here, no, look over here. And like, you're trying to piece it all together. And he's like making something out of it. That might not be satisfactory to you for like what it all means, but in terms of the title and that scene, which like when you go to the vampire's kiss scene and he's showing their faces and then showing the breasts, it feels very much like the scene in Dressed to Kill. He's sort of just repeating himself with that,
I see.
but making it making it very explicit that he's using trickery.
So if that's the read, then where he is the guy staging us to look one way but think we're seeing something and we're not, then his surrogate character is not the main character, Jake. It's the friend, Sam. It's the guy who's planned this murder.
Right.
Which is actually, that is kind of interesting. That if that's the read, then he actually is, you know, I don't know, his stand-in character in the film is the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Is there some self-loathing happening here with Brian DePalma? Or maybe he wants us to, maybe he sympathizes with Sam? I don't know.
Sam's a genius.
Well, I mean, here's another connection. Sam's plan is so convoluted, much like the plot of this movie. So there's a lot of connections
sort
here
of bound
between.
to fall apart.
Is it Sam DePalma? Is that his last name?
We checked that birth certificate.
Matt, do you have more intel on this?
No, I mean that was great. I had no idea about that, and it makes sense, and it kind of speaks to a lot of what De Palma's movies are, especially in this decade. And he does Blowout a couple years before this, which is about a sound technician played by Travolta in like a low budget horror movie. And again, here we see another guy an actor who's on the fringes of Hollywood. And he is paying respect to these people, and he's kind of more interested in these sorts of characters and what they're doing, and kind of, again, the body double aspect. And the porn industry. These are supposed to be more kind of illicit waters, and I think he's more amused by it. I think he's more curious by the underpinnings of what goes on in them, the types of films that are made, which makes sense given how hypersexual his stuff can be. That porn is playing a big role in this film.
Can I have the actual quote from Brian DePalma, because it was slightly different what I said.
Okay.
He said, I started thinking about the whole idea of a body double, and I wondered what I would do if I wanted to make sure to get somebody's attention to have them be looking at a certain place at a certain time. Yeah. So yes, in that case,
Sam.
he is Sam.
Yeah.
He is Sam. He's like, if I wanted to make sure somebody was looking, I would hire Melanie Griffith to do a hot dance.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
And then look what he did. He hired Melanie Griffith to do a hot dance for him and us.
I think he's a fascinating character, or fascinating director and filmmaker, in that he's one of those guys people took for granted at the time. And I think that's why you're seeing so many of his films having to be defended nowadays. And maybe it's the sort of neutering of thrillers and the types of movies that he made, and the fact that there's a lack of that now. We still get a lot of horror movies now because they're really low budget. And we still get filmmakers working at the top of their game still, whether it's Spielberg with The Fabelmans or Jordan Peele with Nope. We see these kind of high concept movies, but we don't see as many of the mid-budget movies that Brian was so good at and that kind of elevated his status, I think, in Hollywood. He was known for these types of films. And in many ways, he's kind of the B-side to Paul Verhoeven's A-side. These are guys who I think Verhoeven's movies are more overtly political, and they've worked in kind of erotic thrillers and neo-noirs, and they've done Hitchcock homages over and over again, but they've also done populist films. They've also worked on massive scales, whether it's Starship Troopers or Mission Impossible or Mission to Mars, which fittingly got De Palma kicked out of Hollywood, and it got him in director jail so that he had to search for European financing for the rest of his career so far. But these are filmmakers who, Verhoeven's the same way, where a lot of his films are kind of being reclaimed and reassessed. So it does take time with filmmakers who either took for granted or maybe they were ahead of the game at the time. And now, kind of watching a lot of these straight to Netflix or Amazon movies, there is kind of indistinguishable quality among those films where you literally can't tell who directed it. You have no idea. There's no separation between a lot of the films. No matter how good the writing is or how good the storytelling is, there is a lack of kind of visual storytelling. There is a lack of filmmaking with like a capital F that I think Brian, among his peers, they were really good, and they still are, obviously.
For sure.
Especially Spielberg, sorry. But Brian kind of used, I think, all the tools, and he simplified it in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe that turned people off, or maybe people just got bored of that. Pauline Kael clearly got bored of that, and she was, his biggest lover, filmically speaking.
I mean, it's hard to. I mean, just to say something in defense of Pauline Kael's reaction to this film, I think it's hard in the moment. Like you were just saying, Matt, that all the Netflix movies kind of seem the same. And I think it's hard in that moment to differentiate. There's a lot of stuff coming out around this time, in 84. De Palma's made a bunch of movies. This is in some ways similar to stuff he's made recently. And I think in that moment, I think it's very difficult to have that kind of, maybe impossible to have that kind of, longer view on a piece of art. And, I think that's partly why it takes time to sort out the stuff which people aren't really going to watch, and the things we're going to rewatch. And the rewatchability, I think, adds a lot to these movies and to their staying power. And part of that rewatchability, it's, I think, driven by, in the case of like Vertigo, for instance, the kind of oddness and the ambiguities of the film. Yeah. And in this film in particular, same. I think that part of the reason this film persists over pick any number of other slasher films that came out in 84 with nudity is that it has both the style, as you were putting it, but also all this strangeness to it, all this unique that really make it unique, not just for its time, but especially compared to the stuff today. And so I think we're just in a really tough position every time to, like Pauline Kael was, to be like, what's going to be the amazing thing that actually, when you dissociate it from the context in which it was created, stands out and persists? Maybe it'll be Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Who knows? I mean, it's just hard to know. Probably not. But
Probably not.
Who knows? And I think this film has a lot of really charming qualities about it. And I, just to put one more point on the Verhoeven comparison, which I think is an apt one. My controversial take is that, I say this in agreement with what you said, Matt, but my controversial appendage to that is, to your point, which was that Verhoeven is the A side and De Palma's the B side, is that part of the reason Verhoeven's the A side is that there's just a lot more interesting stuff happening in the Verhoeven movies, and in Basic Instinct in particular. If you just compare this directly to Basic Instinct, there's just way more.
What do you mean by interesting stuff?
I mean, there's just
It's
way
like
more
plot-wise?
thematic resonance going on. There's more to dig into. There's layers to peel back. I think this film is pretty surfacey, and it's super fun, and it's incredibly compelling. And there's all that psychosexual stuff. But because it's so deliberately quoting, once you've kind of identified the quotes and you've identified the lineage, and then you kind of, we were playing around with our interpretations, but I kind of don't feel like I feel like those are all reaching. Those are all attempts like to add something that's not quite there. And it's fun to do that sometimes, but I felt very different. Like when we were having our Basic Instinct conversation, I felt like I wasn't reaching. I was uncovering, and every time we would dig, there would be another dimension to it. And but anyway, I think that's obviously that's just one man's opinion. I don't want to, I know there are a lot of De Palma lovers out there. I don't want to be knocking on your boy.
Do you want to play rough? Okay. No. Say hello to my little friend.
The De Palma movie, I've kind of, I don't know, fallen for, but I've really enjoyed. I tweeted about it, and randomly this tweet got like, I'm looking at the stats now, 164,000 views and 1,300 likes.
Nice.
This despite me not having a big following at all. So the fact that this blew up on a random Friday night on Twitter was like, I don't know what led to that, or what, whether all of film Twitter was just like hovering and waiting for a hot De Palma take at 8:30 p.m.
But which movie?
Oh, Snake Eyes. Sorry.
Snake Eyes.
I buried the lead. And the end is terrible. And it is really, there is so much that's bad about it. But part of the point of the tweet was like, I'll take this movie over whatever the heck I'm getting. That's sort of any, remotely close to the genre. I like the John Wick movies, but in a way they almost seem repetitive.
Yeah.
In a certain instance, you kind of, at some point, all the tricks, all the moves. Snake Eyes and Femme Fatale, which came out in 2002. And that's kind of, it's another victory lap movie for him. But boy, is it good. And Antonio Banderas is like phenomenal in this film. And I highly recommend seeking that one out, because that's like, he's already, that was financed by French money. And this was after Mission to Mars had failed. Mission to Mars also not that bad. I rewatched it. I'm like, I kind of like this more than Interstellar.
I got to see Mission to Mars now.
Gas.
Laura gasp. I'll be quiet. I'll be silent.
I know Justin's a Nolan head, so I have to
it's fine.
Be wary of my territory. But there is a needle drop in that scene. I think it's Dance the Night Away by Van Halen, where they're on a ship and like Tim Robbins is dancing with Connie Nielsen and Gary Sinise is just like watching them smirking. And I'm like, this is so crazy and like bizarre. I don't know how this made the cut of the movie.
You've sold me. I'm watching it. I'm watching it soon.
Yeah, we're gonna have to have a little, because you just listed 3 movies that I have not seen by Brian De Palma. I told you I haven't seen that much stuff. I've really only seen the early stuff. So Femme Fatale is, I love this genre that doesn't exist anymore, basically. So I will be watching that soon. And we did so many Nick Cage movies, but we skipped Snake Eyes.
We did. I had seen it, and
I've never seen it. I'm looking at this cast; it's amazing.
No,
I think we'll have to check it out. I know that it's got a big oneer. That's all I knew about it, and that the ending is bad. But we got to check it out for ourselves.
Matt, you've given us some homework, and I appreciated it. And honestly, I appreciate you suggesting Body Double, because I had a great time, and
I was so delighted. I was like, "How did this happen? I get to watch a De Palma movie."
Laura was so excited. Thank you for being here, Matt. And the film that you were an associate producer on, Goodbye Petrushka. So tell us a bit about that and where people can watch it.
Sure. Yeah, it's a sort of coming of age indie film about a young lady who's American, but she goes abroad to France to kind of find herself and gets involved in figure skating and a school project, and maybe has some romance, and lives in a really quirky household that's a host family that she has runnings with, and it's kind of a fun watch, and you can catch it on America's favorite 90s indie movie streaming channel, Tubi, and Amazon Prime for free.
Yeah,
So
I saw
check
that
it
it
out.
was streaming on Prime, so we're going to check it out soon. And Matt, where can people follow you on Twitter if they want to hear more Snake Eyes takes?
Yeah, if you want to go, 10 p.m. tweet about Gary Sinise, holler at your boy at Yager Watch 68, JAGR Watch, as in what people in De Palma movies do a lot, and 68.
Awesome.
That's my handle.
The number of Yarmir Yager. The jersey
right.
number, yeah. That's awesome. And we really appreciate you coming back, and we'll have to have you again for some other psychosexual thriller. Maybe it'll be Snake Eyes, but maybe we should even do a different director. I don't know. I think it'd be fun.
Let's mix it up.
Mix it up. We are at CowsPod on Twitter. You can find us on the web at cowspod.wordpress.com and buy a shirt with a cow on it. 2 cows, two for the price of one, at cowspod.threadless.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, feel free to leave a like or review on Apple Podcasts. It helps the show a lot, and we appreciate it. And coming up in 2 weeks, we're going to do another kind of psychosexual thriller. We'll be talking about Manhunter with returning guest Carly.
Oh my gosh,
Severin.
that's happening.
So it's happening.
Oh, wow.
So see you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks.